The story is etched into the world's memory, a haunting tale of hubris and tragedy played out on the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. On the night of April 14, 1912, the RMS Titanic, a titan of the seas on its maiden voyage, met its doom. At 11:40 p.m., the magnificent vessel, celebrated as the pinnacle of modern engineering, collided with a colossal iceberg. The impact was deceptively subtle, a slight shudder felt by some, unnoticed by many. Yet beneath the waterline, a fatal wound had been inflicted. The ensuing hours would see a descent into chaos, a desperate scramble for survival against impossible odds, culminating in the ship's final plunge into the abyss at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th. The human cost of this disaster remains staggering even a century later, a somber testament to the night's horrors. Of the 2,224 souls aboard, a diverse assembly of wealthy industrialists, hopeful immigrants, and dedicated crew, more than 1,500 would perish in the icy darkness. The loss of life was catastrophic, representing more than two-thirds of the ship's total complement. This immense tragedy sent shockwaves across the globe, shattering the era's boundless faith in technology and progress. The sinking of the Titanic was not merely a maritime accident. It was a profound cultural moment that forced a painful re-evaluation of human ambition and our vulnerability in the face of nature's raw power. For decades, the narrative has been dominated by the singular, dramatic image of an iceberg tearing a massive gash in the ship's hull. This simple, powerful explanation provided a clear villain for the story, a monstrous, unyielding force of nature. It suggested that the Titanic, for all its strength, was simply overwhelmed by an obstacle of unimaginable size and power. This version of events, solidified in books, documentaries, and films, became the accepted truth. It was a story of a freak accident, an unlucky encounter on a dark night that no ship, no matter how well built, could have possibly survived. The iceberg was the sole perpetrator of this legendary catastrophe. However, as the years have passed and technology has advanced, a far more complex and unsettling picture has begun to emerge. The simple story of ice versus steel has given way to a more nuanced understanding of the disaster, one that involves a confluence of hidden flaws, human errors, and calculated risks. Recent discoveries and meticulous research have challenged the long-held beliefs, suggesting that the iceberg was not the lone culprit, but rather the final decisive blow in a chain of events that began long before the ship ever left port. The true story of the Titanic is not just about ice, but also about fire, negligence, and a fatal dose of pride. The RMS Titanic was more than just a ship. It was a bold statement of industrial might and Gilded Age luxury. Constructed over 26 months in the bustling Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, she was a true behemoth of her time. The vessel measured an astonishing 882 feet and 9 inches in length, and stood 175 feet tall from keel to funnel top, a floating city of steel and rivets. The construction process itself was a monumental undertaking, employing 3,000 men in a dangerous and demanding environment that sadly resulted in 8 deaths and hundreds of injuries. When completed, she was the largest man-made moving object in the world, a marvel of naval architecture and a symbol of human ingenuity. Her reputation was built on 2 pillars: unprecedented luxury and supposed invincibility. The interiors were designed to rival the finest hotels in Europe, featuring opulent first-class amenities such as a grand staircase, a swimming pool, Turkish baths, and lavishly decorated lounges and dining saloons. For the wealthy elite, a ticket on the Titanic was a ticket to an exclusive world of comfort and extravagance at sea. This splendor, combined with her advanced safety features, fostered a pervasive belief that she was practically unsinkable. The ship was equipped with a double-bottomed hull and divided into 16 watertight compartments, a design so robust it was believed she could stay afloat even if 4 of these compartments were flooded. This aura of invincibility was not just a product of public perception, it was heavily promoted by the White Star Line. The company marketed the Titanic and her sister ships, the Olympic and Britannic, as the new standard in safe and reliable transatlantic travel. The very idea that such a vessel could founder seemed preposterous to its designers, its crew, and the public alike. This confidence was so absolute that it bred a sense of complacency that would have devastating consequences. The ship was seen as a triumph of technology over the perils of the ocean, a belief that permeated every decision made concerning her operation and her fateful maiden voyage. The cost of building this floating palace was immense, totaling $7.5 million in 1912, a figure equivalent to over $166 million in the 21st century. Interestingly, this colossal sum was less than the $200 million budget for the famous 1997 film that would later immortalize its story. The investment was a testament to the White Star Line's ambition to dominate the highly competitive transatlantic passenger trade. The Titanic was not merely a vessel. She was the flagship of a new era, a promise of speed, comfort, and above all, safety. This powerful combination of engineering prowess and public relations created a mythos that made her eventual demise all the more shocking and tragic. The classic story of the Titanic's demise paints a dramatic picture. A massive iceberg, hidden in the darkness, tearing a single, continuous 300-foot gash along the ship's starboard side. This has been the prevailing theory for over a century, a simple and visceral image that explains how the unsinkable ship could have been brought down so quickly. It suggests a brutal, overwhelming force that ripped through the steel hull like a can opener, instantly dooming the vessel. This narrative became the cornerstone of the Titanic legend, emphasizing the sheer power of nature and the suddenness of the catastrophe. It was a compelling and easily understood explanation for an event that seemed, at the time, to defy all logic. However, modern science and underwater exploration have systematically dismantled this long-held belief. The advent of sophisticated underwater robotics and advanced imaging technology has allowed researchers to study the wreck in unprecedented detail. These investigations revealed no evidence of a single massive gash. Instead, the evidence points to a much different type of impact. The iceberg did not rip the hull open in one long tear. Instead, the collision was a glancing blow where the underwater spur of the iceberg bumped and ground along the ship's side, popping rivets and causing a series of smaller, separate breaches along the hull plates. The most definitive evidence came from a groundbreaking project in 2023 to 2024, which created a full-sized digital twin of the entire wreck site. By stitching together over 700,000 high-resolution images, scientists created a complete three-dimensional model that could be examined from every angle. This digital reconstruction, combined with computer simulations conducted in 2025, confirmed the new theory. The analysis concluded that the iceberg created a series of small punctures, each roughly the size of a standard A4 sheet of paper, spread out across 6 of the ship's forward compartments. The damage was subtle but extensive, a chain of weaknesses rather than one catastrophic failure. This discovery fundamentally changes our understanding of the sinking. The Titanic was engineered to be a fortress, but it had a specific, calculated vulnerability. The ship's designers had advertised its safety by stating it could survive the flooding of up to 4 of its 16 watertight compartments. The iceberg, by puncturing 6 of them, breached this critical threshold. The damage was not immediately overwhelming, which is why the sinking took 2 hours and 40 minutes. But once the 6 compartments were compromised, the laws of physics made the outcome inevitable. The bow began to dip, allowing water to spill over the tops of the watertight bulkheads into successive compartments, sealing the great ship's fate. While the Iceberg delivered the final blow, compelling evidence suggests the ship was already wounded before it even left the dock. For over 30 years, I have researched a critical, often overlooked factor in the disaster: a major fire burning deep within one of the ship's massive coal bunkers. This fire was not a small, manageable blaze. It was a serious event that had been smouldering for as long as 3 weeks before the Titanic even began its maiden voyage from Southampton. The fire was located in coal bunker number 6, situated right against the forward bulkhead of boiler room number 5, a location that would prove to be tragically significant. Photographic evidence, which I spent years analysing, supports this theory. In a series of photographs taken of the Titanic before it set sail, a distinct 30-foot-long black mark is visible on the ship's starboard hull, precisely in the area of the coal bunker fire. This discoloration was not a shadow or a trick of the light. It was a physical mark consistent with heat damage originating from inside the ship. This subtle but crucial clue, hidden in plain sight for a century, indicates that the steel in this section of the hull had been subjected to intense and prolonged heat. The fire was an open secret among some of the crew, but its severity was deliberately downplayed. The implications of this fire are profound, especially when considering the properties of steel. Metallurgy experts who have examined the evidence suggest that a fire of this nature, burning at temperatures potentially exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius, could have had a devastating effect on the ship's hull. Such extreme heat would have significantly compromised the structural integrity of the steel, reducing its strength by as much as 75%. This process, known as embrittlement, would have made the hull dangerously brittle and far more susceptible to fracture, especially upon impact with something as solid as an iceberg in freezing water. Therefore, the section of the hull that made contact with the iceberg was likely not the strong, resilient steel it was designed to be. It was weakened, compromised steel that had been slowly cooked for weeks. When the iceberg struck this precise location, the brittle metal did not just bend or dent, it shattered. The fire had effectively created a weak spot, pre-damaging the ship's armor at the exact point of impact. This theory does not replace the iceberg's role, but recontextualizes it. The iceberg was the trigger, but the fire had loaded the gun, turning a survivable collision into a fatal catastrophe. The existence of a fire aboard a passenger liner on its maiden voyage should have been cause for immediate alarm and, at the very least, a significant delay. However, the management of the White Star Line made a conscious and fateful decision to conceal the problem and proceed with the voyage as planned. Evidence of this cover-up can be seen in the simple fact of how the ship was docked in Southampton. The Titanic was deliberately berthed with its port side facing the quay, leaving the starboard side, the side with the telltale black marks from the fire, hidden from the view of the public, the press, and the passengers. This was not a coincidence. It was a calculated act of deception. The reasons behind this decision were rooted in immense financial and logistical pressures. The spring of 1912 had been marked by a national coal miners' strike in Britain, which had severely disrupted shipping schedules and created a massive backlog of coal and passengers. The White Star Line had already cancelled sailings for other ships and transferred their coal and passengers to the Titanic to ensure its maiden voyage would be a sold-out, high-profile event. Delaying or cancelling the Titanic's departure would have been a financial and public relations disaster, undermining the immense hype and investment that had gone into the ship. The pressure to sail on time was enormous. The ship's officers and the company's chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, who was aboard for the voyage, were all aware of the fire. The plan was not to extinguish it at port, which would have required emptying the massive coal bunker and thus causing a delay. Instead, the strategy was to manage the fire at sea by having the stokers continuously feed coal from the burning bunker directly into the furnaces, a process known as drawing down the bunker. They hoped to bring the fire under control and empty the bunker before the ship reached New York. This decision prioritized the sailing schedule and the company's reputation over the fundamental safety of the vessel and its passengers. This gamble illustrates a corporate culture where perceived invincibility and commercial interests overshadowed prudence. The belief in the Titanic's unsinkable design may have given the management a false sense of security, leading them to believe that a small internal fire was a manageable problem that did not pose a genuine threat to the ship's integrity. They rolled the dice, betting that they could resolve the issue quietly during the crossing. It was a bet they would lose in the most catastrophic way imaginable, as their secret problem collided violently with an unforeseen external threat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Beyond the fire and the iceberg, a series of smaller but critical human errors and oversights created a perfect storm of disaster. One of the most glaring failures was the shocking lack of lifeboats. The Titanic was legally compliant with the outdated regulations of the time, but it carried only 20 lifeboats, enough capacity for just 1,178 people, roughly one-third of the total number on board. The ship's original design had called for 48 lifeboats, but this number was reduced during the planning stages. The reason was purely aesthetic. The executives at the White Star Line felt that a deck cluttered with too many lifeboats would spoil the promenade space and the ship's sleek appearance for first-class passengers. Another seemingly minor mistake had major consequences. The binoculars for the ship's lookouts in the crow's nest were locked away in a storage compartment, and the key was missing. The key had been in the possession of Second Officer David Blair, who was transferred off the ship at the last minute before it sailed from Southampton. In the rush of the handover, Blair forgot to pass the key to his replacement. This oversight was not discovered until 3 days into the voyage. While it is impossible to know for certain, it is highly probable that with binoculars, the lookouts could have spotted the iceberg much sooner, giving the bridge crucial extra minutes to alter course and potentially avoid the collision altogether. Compounding these issues was the ship's excessive speed. The Titanic was traveling at approximately 22 knots through a known ice field on a moonless night. Warnings of icebergs had been received from other ships in the area throughout the day, yet these warnings did not prompt Captain Edward Smith to significantly reduce speed. The pressure to make good time on the maiden voyage and arrive in New York to great fanfare was likely a contributing factor. This high speed drastically reduced the amount of time the crew had to react once the iceberg was finally spotted. When the warning came, the massive ship was moving too fast to execute a sharp enough turn to avoid contact. Each of these failures, insufficient lifeboats, missing binoculars, and excessive speed, speaks to a culture of complacency and overconfidence. The belief in the ship's technological superiority led to a relaxation of basic safety protocols. The lifeboats were seen as unnecessary, the binoculars as a non-essential tool, and the speed as a perfectly acceptable risk. No single error sank the Titanic. Instead, it was the cumulative effect of these seemingly disconnected decisions. Each one stripped away a layer of safety, leaving the ship and its passengers dangerously exposed when the moment of crisis finally arrived. It was a cascade of human error that sealed the ship's fate. In the years since its discovery in 1985, the wreck of the Titanic has been a source of endless fascination and scientific inquiry. Recent expeditions have pushed the boundaries of underwater exploration, yielding stunning new insights. A summer 2024 dive, the first unmanned mission in 14 years, used high-resolution photography to document the ship's current state. It brought both somber and exciting news. The iconic railing at the ship's prow, made famous in film, has finally collapsed due to decay. However, the same expedition located and photographed the bronze Diana of Versailles statue from the first-class lounge for the first time since 1986, a ghostly artifact from a lost world of luxury. The most significant recent breakthrough is the digital twin created from over 700,000 images, which provides a complete three-dimensional view of the wreck. This model has allowed scientists to confirm the heroic actions of the ship's engineering crew, led by Chief Engineer Joseph Bell. The scans show that some boilers are concave, indicating a sudden influx of cold water while they were still hot and operational. An open steam valve was also found, proving that the engineers stayed at their posts to the very end. They bravely worked to keep the ship's lights and power running, allowing for the launching of the few lifeboats in lit conditions and preventing widespread panic in total darkness. Their sacrifice, which cost all of them their lives, undoubtedly saved others. The new science has reshaped our understanding of the disaster, moving it from a simple tale of an iceberg to a complex story of combined failures. We now know the iceberg did not create one huge gash, but a series of smaller punctures. We also know that a pre-existing coal fire likely weakened the hull, making it vulnerable to that impact. These scientific truths, combined with the documented human errors, the lack of lifeboats, the missing binoculars, the excessive speed, and the concealment of the fire, paint a complete picture. The sinking was not an unavoidable act of God. It was the result of a chain of choices and accidents, a perfect storm of human error and technological pride. The story of the Titanic endures because it is a powerful human lesson. It teaches us about the dangers of hubris and the folly of placing blind faith in our own creations. The ship was a marvel, but her creators and operators forgot that she was not infallible. The tragic loss of over 1,500 lives was a direct consequence of a series of poor decisions, each one compounding the last. The Titanic is more than a shipwreck. It is a timeless cautionary tale, an echo from the deep, reminding us that even the greatest technological achievements are only as strong as the judgment and humility of the people who command them.